New this morning, the watchdog under watch. The Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, was created to be a nonpartisan, unbiased economic predictor, but it's now coming under fire for massive misses and a pattern of favoring Democrats' tax and spend policies. So is the system rigged from the start? Deputy Public Policy Editor for OpenTheBooks.com, Rachel O'Brien, joining us now to discuss just that. Good morning to you, Rachel. Let's start with the core mission here. What did you discover about the CBO's scoring of major legislative initiatives?
Good morning, Jen. Yeah, so their routine forecasting has been generally accurate. But even their self-audits show that they're scoring on these costly benchmark pieces of legislation. They miss the mark. So they make annual estimates of federal outlays and income for the coming year, and then they go back and they conduct an analysis later on the accuracy of those predictions the following year. So a recent report, they found the average error in their revenue projections was just 6% up or down. So it's not terribly off. But the CBO works with lawmakers on Capitol Hill during the bill writing process to achieve desirable scores. So essentially, they're making reports say what the supporters of that package want to hear. And so their predictions of spending and saving on these major legislative packages, they're often wrong.
And when they have misses, they have big misses. And one really great example of that is Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which we all know is not affordable at all. The CBO initially scored the cost at $788 billion. This is over a span of 10 years. However, the true price was actually $1.76 trillion with a T dollars. So they were off by nearly $1 trillion, which is 123%. I know you're giving some statistics there. You know, it's interesting, Rachel, because if this was the private sector, that would have been bankruptcy from the bounce.
Sure.
From
that would
the
not
bounce.
Fly, absolutely.
So what's some other examples?
That was the biggest miss, right? Obamacare, absolutely. Anyone who's participated in it or who has just watched the healthcare industry has noticed that big flop, right? So the 2009 stimulus, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, when that was being considered, the CBO estimated that it would increase budget deficits by $787 billion, again, in a 10-year period, 2009 to 2019. But just a couple of years later, 2012, the CBO changed their estimate to $831 billion, and then again to $840 billion. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, they expanded the child tax credit. The CBO predicted that would cost about $109 billion. They recalculated, and surprise, it spiked to $185 billion. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, the CBO calculated that bill would create savings and revenue worth $738 billion. They said it would reduce the deficit by $238 billion over 10 years. Of course, it actually increased the deficit by $300 billion. So these are some major spending packages where CBO just misses the mark completely.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, the CBO is not transparent about its spending and how it operates. Why not?
They don't have to be, because they're not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and they're not an agency within the executive branch. They're part of the legislative branch, so they can do whatever they want. They don't have to give records to any of their activity other than to Congress and certain congressional appropriations records. So we can see, for instance, that the CBO requested from Congress $75.8 million for fiscal year 2026. That's more than an 8% increase over the last year. So we can just see that budget, but if you're looking at what they're spending it on, it's vague. They do tell us that they want to increase their staff. They're going from 270 staffers to 285 staffers, that they're using other funding for things like cybersecurity and software and hardware, and very vaguely purchases of commercial data and equipment. Of course, we don't know what, but we don't get specifics like staff names or titles or salary records like we get from other agencies. So we sort of have to rely on very sparse data. Mm-hmm. So taxpayers need something not only more accurate from the CBO when they're making these projections and more evidence-based, but more transparent and less open to this narrative crafting and fiddling with the scores for politics that they're able to do.
Because it sounds like they're not acting like a referee, but rather a silent partner trying to get legislation across the finish line. Rachel O'Brien with OpenTheBooks.com. We appreciate you joining us. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan.